My mother told me when I was growing up that I was the child that wasn't supposed to happen but happened anyway. You know, then a lot of people in the world can say that. But my mom was told after my sister, any more children, she would die. And so, you know, a few years would go by and then they find out they're pregnant with me. And the decision was put before them by the doctor, you know, of consideration. You may not want to keep him or her. Obviously, it's too early to tell whether I was a boy or girl yet, but they put that option in front of them. You may want to determine whether you want to get an abortion or not. Thankfully, we know, because we're now in the future,
Right.
present day, they didn't do that. And I'm blessed to have a life because they allowed me to have that life. But in our world today, one of the most prominent, popular, and literally easiest of accesses of sins with the least amount of consequences is abortion. And as far as consequences on the person who's getting the abortion,
Right.
you know, if I wanted to tell my wife to go get an abortion, there's not really that much of a difficulty to do it. And so this is a huge prevalent problem that exists in our world today. And there are a lot of questions and a lot of people that throw out different things with it. In fact, just to kind of set the tone for this, right before this program, right before we started talking, I uploaded the number of abortion and abortion counter, and since we've been talking, 143 people have died. Since we've been talking. And worldwide this year, there have been 35,446,264. Worldwide today, 45,670. And of course, I'm not going to be accurate because every second it rises.
It's going up.
And so we have to understand something. This is the most insane amount of murder that happens every day and is not even called murder. And so I want to look at some arguments that are presented, some questions that are asked, and I want it to be understood. I sympathize with anyone who has faced difficulty and has gotten pregnant as a result. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I want to first ask, you know, what would you do if someone says it's my body, so isn't it my choice?
And I want to get to that, but let me preface my statement. My birthday is January 25th, 1973. January 22nd, 1973 is when the decision Roe v. Wade came down to allow murder of innocent life. And I'm thankful to my parents that they certainly, you know, chose to have me, and I'm glad to be here and to be blessed by God in that way. And I'm so thankful for my parents. You know, it wasn't readily available to them, you know, during earlier in that year when I was still in the womb, no doubt. But that date is so close to my birthday. I've always thought about that. You know, this question or this statement, it's my body, so it's my choice, and we hear that shouted by especially the feminist movement, and it's my body. Well, in one sense, it is. In another sense, it's not, and that's what I want to spend a moment or two talking about. You know, God created male and female, never intended that we would take or kill innocent life. No catchphrase made by someone who is emotional, a movement that is spurred on such a sometimes, you know, we've seen in the news in recent months and the past couple of years especially, just almost violent movements, you know, while there's at the same time shouting, "It's my body." But no catchphrase made by an emotional, spurred on individual fighting for a supposed right to kill innocent is going to be made okay with God. And it shouldn't be okay with us.
Right.
And so I think about, let's look at Psalm 139 for just a moment. And the psalmist declares, you know, while certainly praising God for all that God has done, and we find Psalm 139 and beginning in verse 13, "For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb." He was a child. He was a soul given by God in his mother's womb. And David here is referring to himself in the womb. And he says, I will praise thee. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, that my soul knoweth right well. He says, I know right well. I am blessed. I'm wonderfully made. Well, God made him. And so that shout doesn't carry much weight with God that many shout today. And I think about, God knew him in the womb. Job makes a similar statement, or it's recorded in Job, a similar statement. Did not he that made me in the womb make him? Job 31, verse 15. And we have to remember, it takes two individuals, a male and a female, for pregnancy to occur. And sinful actions often, though, beget other sinful actions.
Sure.
But it doesn't have to be that way. And it's certainly not okay with God. Somewhere down the road, we have to stop the progress of sin.
Mm-hmm.
And, the initial reaction to, oh no, I'm pregnant, should be a red flag that goes off to say, I've been doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I need to do something different. I need to change my ways. And I need to think about this differently and not go down some other sinful road to try to, maybe as David did in the Old Testament, to try to cover up what has been done. Yes, a mistake was made, but that is a life. And now you're in charge of that life. You can, there are other options that are there besides taking that innocent life. And I think about what the wise man would say in Proverbs chapter 6. And I think this is so very clear. And verse 16, he begins by saying, these 6 things doth the Lord hate. And the word hate, we don't usually use that word like that. That's a strong word, hate. Yea, 7 are an abomination unto him. 7 things that God hates. 7 things that are an abomination. And you start going through this list. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. Something that God absolutely hates and considers an abomination. I don't think it's any more plain. Is there any more innocent life that you could think of than that life that's in the womb? I can't fathom any other life that's more innocent than that. And this is something that the wise man Solomon says that God absolutely hates the shedding of innocent blood.
I mean, it made the top 3.
Yes.
Usually when we rank things,
Sure.
we rank them, one. If I'm going to rank the top college football teams, I'm not going to start with number 7.
Right.
I'm going to start with number 1. Who's the best? It made the top 3.
Yeah, and that's not the only on the list. A heart that deviseth the wicked imagination. Because and even to follow that, feet that are swift running into mischief. There's that mischief out there, and that's what led to obviously this problem. But also then devising wicked imaginations. The ways that many have come up with, come up with to abort a child. If you just do some study on abortion itself, that heinous act that's taking place. It's such an atrocity. I can't even imagine. And I remember years ago seeing a graphic of this many war, this many lives were lost. In this particular war, this many lives were lost. And it goes on down through all of our wars that have been fought in the United States alone, just not even going beyond that. And the number that you gave a moment ago is far succeeds the number that have been lost in every war that our country has fought. And you start thinking about, we're talking about the most vulnerable and the most innocent lives. And the taking of that life, God hates and considers an abomination. I don't think that it's my body, so it's my choice stacks up to that. And I begin to think about we're not our own. And so, Michael, I'm going to put it back on you. How would you answer that?
First of all, I think we have a big discrepancy in the world with when is it a human life? They say, well, at this point, it's human life. Yet, still there are abortions that are done at that period.
Yeah.
In fact, after the 16 weeks gestation period this year, 38,930 were aborted. After 16 weeks. And so that, even after the point where they would imagine, okay, at this point it would be considered a living being. But I know, based on what you mentioned, it's a living being the moment that it comes into an existence.
Yeah.
Jeremiah 1:5 says, before you were formed, I knew you.
Right.
And even in Genesis 2:7, the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground. So, okay, prior to the Lord breathing into man, he had been formed, had he not? His body was laying on the ground, was it not?
Yeah.
So was he a living being then? No. But he had a body. He wasn't living until the Lord breathed into his nostrils the breath of life.
Yeah.
That's when he became a living being. When the breath of life is present, that happens at conception.
Right.
That happens the moment that the human being is formed, is the moment that it reaches the... We know this. We understand this. It's biblical. Before you were formed, I knew you. That means before I was born, God knew that I was going to be. How many babies have died because of a technicality that some doctor has been able to push onto people and to make them believe such and such is the case? Years ago, you could have said, have you Snopes that? Have you checked Snopes on that? Nowadays, we don't say that anymore because we've even found out recently they're not very accurate.
Right.
But we used to say, did you fact check that? Okay, if I have an agenda, I'll say anything to push that agenda. Well, it's not a baby yet.
Right.
How can I make someone feel better about a murder? It's not really a murder. How can I make somebody feel better about tax evasion and stealing from the government? You tell them that it's not that big of a deal. Right. You tell them, well, it's okay that you're going to do this. But if you will, God has the copyright on man.
Yeah.
God formed man. God created man. He's the only one that can do it. It's patent pending. There is no one else that can come through and say, I'm going to do that. God has the rights to it, and the only one that has the rights to it. Therefore, then he has the right to tell me what to do with the body that he gave me. I want you to notice Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 7 where it says, then the dust, this is talking about at death, the dust will return to the earth as it was. You remember Genesis 2:7 says he formed man out of the dust of the ground. So we return to the dust, the body that is, but the spirit goes back to God who gave it.
Right.
Then that tells me it doesn't matter whether you think my body has formed fully yet in the womb. I have a spirit.
Right.
I have a soul. And that soul is what makes me a living being. It doesn't matter whether my arms are formed or my legs have formed yet or my ears have even formed. I'm a living being.
Yeah.
Years ago, you saw those pins going around with the little tiny feet that represented abortions that were done and how you could see human being characteristics and human feet that had been formed, and yet they would say that's not a baby. That's not a human being. But the Lord says that doesn't even matter. Your spirit is what makes you alive.
Right.
If I were to drop dead right now, no doctor would come in here and say that I were living because I had a fully formed body. No doctor would come in here and say, is he sleeping? What's wrong with him? They would understand I have passed on. But when it comes to something that is tiny, we forget that logic because it's convenient for us. But there is a serious one, and we've not talked about this one yet. When we suggest that we need to be careful with our bodies, we're in no way, shape, or form suggesting that raping somebody is the woman's fault. Never would I suggest that. I understand that there have been certain situations where that may have occurred and it may have been partly, but it still resides in the person who commits that crime.
Right.
And it is a crime.
Yeah.
But I know one of the questions it's asked, when I was raped, well, can't I abort the baby? I don't want to carry the child of the one who raped me. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to carry the child who raped me. And you know what? I actually, know of a good friend of mine. She went on a date and this happened to her, and she got pregnant as a result. And she determined, because she was a Christian, she was going to keep the child. She's kept the child. She's raising him as her own because he is her own.
Right.
And she told me, I am keeping him because, yeah, okay, sure, a part of that man is going to reside in my son. But not from birth will he be like that man.
Right.
And I think we forget that. We forget that sometimes we look at people and we see someone, okay, if my father was a horrible, awful human being, it doesn't mean I'm going to be. There have been countless examples of, even in regular history, not just biblical history, of people who were born into a horrible situation, You know, someone can trace their lineage back to Hitler. Somebody can trace it back to that family tree. Does that mean that they too are like Hitler? We don't suggest that. So I think number one, we have to understand that. But number two, I can give you the statistics. On this year alone, how many abortions were actually done because of rape or incest? 7,867. To put that in perspective, in about the 16 minutes we've been talking, 1,207 have been aborted. That tells me that even if you were to suggest, and I think there'd be some truth to this, well, maybe not everybody reported it. Okay, I'll grant you that. Maybe some are ashamed and they don't report it. Even still, the numbers pale in comparison. Really, abortion can be best defined as the convenient murder.
Yeah.
It's more convenient for me to murder this child than to keep it.
Right.
And we'll get to that in a minute. But I want to just throw it to you, and I'll say this. I'll say all I want to say on this. I'll throw it to you. When you throw it back to me, I'll ask you my next question. I mentioned Jeremiah 1:5 earlier.
Yeah.
Before I formed you, I knew you. God knows us before we were even formed. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether a horrible and heinous crime has occurred to me. The child's life is still important. In Exodus, you have Moses growing up in a time where the children were being slaughtered.
Yeah.
And that didn't give the parents the right to say, well, we can't keep you, so we need to just get rid of you. If there was ever a time for an abortion, it was then. If there was ever a biblical time for abortion, it was then. Kill the children that are 2 years old and younger that are male. This child's going to be a male. You need to kill it as soon as it's born. You don't need to keep it. But they kept the child until they couldn't keep it anymore, and then they sent it down the river in a basket and prayed to the Lord that it would find, and Moses did find a good place to be.
Right.
But what would you say if someone says, but Wayne, I was raped, or I'm a victim of incest, can't I abort the baby then?
You know, and I can't even begin to imagine what somebody might be going through, you know, who has been raped or taken advantage of in that way. And at the same time, as horrible as that might be for the individual, as it must be for the individual, I pray that they would take a moment to consider the child, to consider the innocence of the child, consider that, you know, that child can grow up in a loving home, whether it's their home or another home.
Right.
You know, there are other options, you know, besides murdering that child.
Right.
And maybe it is so horrible to think about a child that's come about by such a heinous crime. But again, that child is innocent, and that child deserves an opportunity for life. And I think that's something that we might, you know, need to be reminded of, that we consider that life. You know, what has happened has happened to that individual. That's not the child's fault. That's you know, the child is still innocent in all of that. And like you say, you know, their environment that they grow up, they don't have to be, even though from that dad, that father, his DNA, you know, because of what took place in that crime, you know, yeah, they may have some characteristics, maybe physical characteristics. Right. But spiritually speaking, they don't have to be the same. Emotionally, they don't have to be the same, because they can grow up in a loving home and they can know how to properly treat a woman, and that's certainly not right. You know, what their father had done. Right. So they can learn differently, and they can grow up in a better environment, and they can have opportunity for life, and to you know, to think about that soul, because God has given that soul, and you explained that very well just a moment ago. But regardless, if abortion is what's being considered, that is still murdering an innocent life. And there again, you know, we don't need to go down that road, a wrong road, a sinful road, to take a life when, you know, this heinous crime has happened. Mm-hmm. As horrific and that shame that I know, and talking to some have felt. And I again, I all I can do is try to put myself in their shoes in some way, but and I know that it has to be horrific what they're going through, but please consider the child in that, and what would be best for them to have that opportunity for life, not take that away from them because of something that has happened to us or to that girl. So that's what I would want them to consider, the child.
And again, as we talk about this, there's a third one that comes up a lot, and it's probably one of the more common.
Yeah.
I would say it is the most common, other than my body, my choice. I'm not ready to be a parent. This will ruin my life. Now, I'm going to start prefacing this by saying, and then I want to throw it to you and see what you have to say, but you look at 1 Timothy 5:22, which talks about, do not lay hands on anyone hastily, nor share in other people's sins. Keep yourself pure. Okay. If I am then to understand that purity means clean, like a wedding dress, no spot, no blemish, then that means that then there is a specific way that I can be pure.
Right.
Because otherwise, why would Paul tell Timothy by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, hey, you keep yourself pure, by the way, you can't do it. Just thought I'd tell you. Yeah. That'd be cruel. Obviously, we can keep ourselves pure. So, Wayne, what would you do if someone says, I'm not ready to be a parent, it's going to ruin my life?
Well, and it's very true that individuals may not be ready to be parents. Then they need to not be in that situation where parenting is the next step.
Right.
And keeping oneself pure obviously is going to prevent just such a situation as that, not being ready to be a parent. But do you want to be a murderer? And you know, and that seems, and I don't want to come across that. I don't want that to sound harsh.
Well,
but I don't know how else to say it.
Right.
But you know, the question is, okay, well, I'm not being pure, so I found myself in this situation, but I'm not ready to be a parent. Well, are you ready to be a murderer?
Right.
And I don't know of anybody who would say, yeah, I'm ready to be a murderer. And so we don't want to go down that road as well, so, because again, we're talking about taking an innocent life. You know, that baby can have a life ahead of them, and you know, adoption is, you know, an opportunity. There are plenty of children who come into this world who are not aborted, who need homes, and you know, we see children's homes all the time. You know, we support children's homes, and we try to help. And care for those children, make sure their needs are met in some way, you know, while they're looking for a home to be a part of. And so, you know, we certainly need to, if you're not ready to be a parent, then stay out of that situation that would lead down that road to begin with. You know, while we're talking about that, you know, one mistake was made, we don't need to make another. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the question, and I'm just going to real brief mention this, sometimes it's brought up that as men, we're talking about this as guys.
Right.
And so, and I realize that that's hard for people maybe to accept and take, but I found this article on desiringgod.org. But just real quick, he makes 7 points why men have a right to be in this argument, to have this conversation. And I won't cover all of them, but several of them, and they're all really good, what he talks about here, but the fact that we were all once in the womb gives us some perspective to talk about these things. And every aborted child had a father that was involved in the process. And so we certainly have to think about that as well. You know, when it comes to society, you know, taking human life is a public issue, much the same way any homicide would be, manslaughter would be, war, capital punishment, all of those things. We should be able to be in that conversation. And I would say this comes back to that innocence of life, that vulnerable life that's in the womb. Part of being a man, part of masculinity, is standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so we have every right to be in the conversation, if you will, when it comes to abortion. That question, I'm not ready to be a parent, this is going to ruin my life, and so shouldn't I be able to abort? Don't walk down that road to begin with, and that won't be a problem. But to those who have and are considering that, you know, consider that innocent life. Stand up for that life. Give them opportunity to live their life. And if your home's not the best home, then get them another home And there are so many families who are not able to have children biologically who want to, who would love to. And I would say that's an opportunity for them. And so help them find that better life in that way. Do your part in that.
Right. I have a suggestion that I know no one will take me up on. If you want to let your children be adults, then treat them like adults. Fine, you want to let them have premarital sex? Okay. Let them handle your finances for a full month and pay all the bills, and let them go to work, let them do all the aspects that an adult has to do. Because when you start to act like an adult, very quickly you will have to become one.
Right.
Now, when we were little, we would play house, and we would, with our friends, and we would play like we were an adults. Or for me, I would pretend to be dad, and I would preach in the house and act as though we're at worship. And that's me pretending to be an adult. But the moment I became an adult, the moment I hit my adulthood and I had to go out into the world on my own, I was like, please let me go back to being a kid. Right. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be an adult anymore. Not because I had a baby or anything like that, but because there were bills to pay and all these kinds of things. And we forget the responsibility of it. That's right. We forget that, okay, sure, having the opportunity to be promiscuous with the opposite sex is an enjoyable and pleasurable thing. God intended it to be with your spouse.
Yeah.
Because when you look in Genesis 1:28, God forms man and woman, and He says, be fruitful and multiply. They're married. There's no one else that they could be with. They're married to one another. God married them.
Yep.
And He says, you be fruitful and multiply. You have the right to have children. Jesus would say in Matthew 19:4-6, haven't you read that in the beginning God made them male and female? And for this cause shall man leave father and mother and cleave unto his girlfriend, to his fiance, to his buddy that he's shacking up with because he loves her and doesn't want to put a ring on it because most statistics on marriage end in divorce. No, his wife. Yeah. His wife. You want to have a baby, you want to take part in having, intercourse and all those things that God has intended, that's fine. You've got to bear the responsibility though that comes with it. And if you're going to do these actions, it's the same as if someone is involved in drugs or involved in drinking a lot. Don't be shocked when your liver fails. Don't be shocked if you're constantly shooting a particular drug, if all of a sudden your body can't take it anymore and you overdose. And maybe you're thankfully brought back, but you can't sit there and then say, how'd this happen? But we do that with pregnancy. How in the world did we get pregnant? Yeah. Do we really have to think about it? Do we really have to ask that question? Wayne, I think about it. In the last 28 minutes, 2,100 plus have died. That's worldwide. That's worldwide. I can't fathom that. There's a problem. You use the argument, it will ruin my life. Stop ruining the lives of the babies that we're killing. Yeah. Sure, they get to go be with Jesus, but we're ruining their chance at helping this world be a better place.
Right. Stop ruining your own life by getting yourself into that situation.
Absolutely.
So
we have a responsibility.
I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life He gives. I know that my Redeemer lives, that my Redeemer